A single helicopter rises into the sky below it. Thousands are still waiting. No more seats, no more time, no way out. This is not the beginning of a battle. This is how a war ends. April 1975. Saigon. The final hours of the Vietnam War are unfolding in silence, chaos, and impossible decisions as forces of the North Vietnamese Army close in. An entire city begins to collapse. Not with explosions, but with fear. Inside the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, a secret evacuation is underway in operation. That will become the largest helicopter escape in history, Operation Frequent Wind, but not everyone will make it out. And some decisions will echo for decades. Welcome to History Ledger. Tonight we witness the final hours of Saigon through the eyes of those who escaped and those who were left behind. Saigon, April 19. War had already been decided, though no one had yet spoken the final words. For years, the conflict in Vietnam had stretched across jungles, rivers, and villages, pulling in global powers and leaving behind a fractured nation. Now it was ending not with ceremony, but with quiet inevitability. Forces of the North Vietnamese Army were advancing faster than anyone had expected. City after city in South Vietnam had fallen in rapid succession. Da Nang was gone, Hue had collapsed, and now all roads led to Saigon inside the capital. The illusion of control was beginning to break. Government offices remained open, but their authority was fading. Rumors spread faster than official announcements. Some said the Americans were preparing to leave. Others insisted they would stay until the end. On the streets, people were no longer waiting for confirmation. They were preparing for escape. Families gathered what little they could carry: suitcases filled with documents, photographs, and memories. Anything that might prove identity, loyalty, or survival in a world that was about to change them. Burned papers in the open air, watching years of association turn to ash. Others searched desperately for connections, any link to foreign officials who might secure them a place out. Because in Saigon, one truth had become clear. Not everyone would leave. At the center of it all stood the U.S. Embassy, a symbol of American presence. For over a decade now, it had become something else. A final doorway behind its woes. Plans were already unfolding. Coded messages moved between officials. Lists were being prepared, names of those who would be evacuated: diplomats, military personnel, selected South Vietnamese allies. Every name represented a decision, and every decision meant someone else would be left behind. Operation had been given a name: Operation Frequent Wind. It would become the largest helicopter evacuation in history. But in these early days, it was still a plan, fragile, uncertain, and dependent on time that was quickly running out. Beyond the embassy walls, desperation was growing. Crowds began to gather outside, hoping for access. Some carried letters of recommendation. Others simply waited, believing that presence alone might grant them passages. Marines guarded the gates, watching as the numbers slowly increased. They had their orders: maintain control, protect the embassy, prepare for evacuation. But even they could sense what was coming. The city was no longer stable. It was unraveling. Far beyond Saigon, the sound of artillery echoed closer each day. Columns of North Vietnamese forces moved steadily south. Their objective was no longer contested. It was in Saigon. The final days of a nation were unfolding, yet life in strange ways continued. Markets remained open. Motorbikes still weaved through crowded streets. Children still played in alleyways. But beneath it all, there was a quiet tension, a shared understanding that everything familiar was about to disappear for the United States. This was not just a military withdrawal. It was the end of a long and costly chapter in the Vietnam War. A war that had shaped politics, divided societies, and taken countless lives. Now it was coming to a close in a single city, and that city was running out of time. Soon decisions would turn into action. Plans would become reality, and the skies above Saigon would fill with helicopters. But for now, the city waited, caught between what it had been and what it was about to become. April 29th, 1975. The end did not arrive with an announcement. It arrived with a signal over the radio. A familiar song began to play: White Christmas, out of season, out of place. But for those who knew, it meant only one thing: the evacuation had begun. Operation Frequent Wind was no longer a plan. It was now in motion above Saigon. The steady rhythm of helicopter blades broke through the humid air. American Huey helicopters swept across the skyline, descending onto rooftops that had been hastily prepared as evacuation points. The city below was no longer waiting. It was moving at the U.S. Embassy. The gates became the center of a growing storm. Thousands gathered outside, pressing forward, calling out, holding documents high. Each person carried a story, a connection, a hope, a reason to be allowed through inside. The compound. U.S. Marines formed a human barrier. They held the line as long as they could. Orders were clear, but reality was not. Because beyond those gates were not enemies. They were civilians, families, allies, people who had worked alongside Americans for years. And now they were asking for one thing. A way out. Helicopters landed and lifted in rapid succession. Engines barely cooled before rising again into the sky. Each landing was precise, each departure urgent. Pilots navigated tight spaces, avoiding buildings, wires, and smoke. There was no margin for error inside the embassy. The evacuation followed. A system names were checked against lists. Priority was given to American personnel and selected individuals. Each decision carried weight, and each hesitation meant delay. And delay was something they could not afford outside. The pressure continued. To build, crowds pushed against the gates. Some climbed walls, others searched for alternate entrances. The sound of helicopter rotors mixed with shouting engines and distant artillery. The city was no longer holding together. It was collapsing in two. Motion across Saigon. Other evacuation points were active. People climbed ladders to rooftops waiting for their turn. Some would make it, many would not. U.S. naval vessels waited in the South China Sea. Each helicopter carried evacuees out over the coastline, landing on crowded decks already filled beyond capacity at times. Helicopters were pushed overboard to make room for more arrivals. Machines sacrificed so that people could live back in the city. The pace intensified. The number of those seeking evacuation far exceeded the number that could be taken, and everyone knew it inside the embassy. The final list began to shrink. Fewer names, fewer flights. Remaining Marines continued to hold their positions, even as the situation grew more desperate. As night fell over Saigon, the operation did not slow. If anything, it became more urgent. Lights from helicopters cut through the darkness, landing, lifting, returning again. The rhythm continued without pause. For those inside, moved quickly. For those outside, it stood still. Every passing moment carried the same question. Would there be another helicopter, or had the last one already gone on? Still, the crowds remained watching the sky, waiting for a chance that might never come. April 30th, 1975. The night had carried on without pause, but now the rhythm was beginning to slow inside. The U.S. Embassy, the final phase had begun. The lists were nearly complete. The remaining evacuees were few, and the time that had once felt short was now almost gone. Outside the embassy walls, thousands still waited. They had not left, they had not given up, because as long as helicopters remained in the sky, there was still hope, but hope was no longer enough. Arrived for the final withdrawal of American personnel. Operation Frequent Wind was coming to its end. U.S. Marines who had held the perimeter were now instructed to prepare for departure. One by one, positions were abandoned, security posts cleared, equipment left behind. There was no time to dismantle, only time to go. The final helicopters approached through the darkness. Each landing carried a sense of finality. There would not be many more Marines boarded in organized groups. Even in the final moments, discipline remained below. Beyond the walls, the crowd surged. Once more, voices rising, hands reaching. Some tried to climb. Others simply watched, because now many understood this was the end. The last helicopter touched down on the embassy rooftop. It did not need to be announced. This was the final flight. Remaining personnel moved quickly. No speeches, no ceremonies, only urgent. It lifted off. It carried the last physical presence of the United States from Saigon below. The embassy was left behind, silent, exposed, empty. As dawn approached, columns of North Vietnamese forces entered the city. There was little resistance left. The gates of the presidential palace gave way, and with that, the capital of South Vietnam ceased to exist as it once had. Soon Saigon would be renamed Ho Chi Minh City. For the United States, it marked the end of the Vietnam War. For those who escaped, survival came with memory. For those who remained, the future arrived without warning. And for the world, one image endured: a helicopter rising from a rooftop, small against the sky, carrying the final moments of a war that changed everything. By sunrise, it was over. Last helicopter had disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind a city and thousands of untold stories. If the story made you pause, think, or see history differently, there is more waiting for you, because this was not the only ending like this. Other wars to other cities. History is filled with final moments that changed everything. Subscribe to History Ledger if you have not yet, because the next story might change how you see the past, and then the past is never silent. It is only waiting to be heard.